Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. And thank you so much for taking time off your busy schedules for tuning in for this presentation today. My name is Siddharth, and I work as a product evangelist for Manage Engine's SIEM suite of products. And I will be your presenter and host for this session. So today's topic is on 5 essential SIEM use cases for 2020 and beyond. The objective is really about talking about and reiterating why SIEM solutions are so important in this day and age, and particularly focus on 5 areas that you might want to, particularly build capabilities in terms of handling some of these use cases. So this presentation will be for around 45 minutes. And throughout the presentation, we encourage you to ask your questions on the Q&A or the chat option on the Zoom panel. And we'll try to answer them then and there along the course of the webinar. But we also have 10 minutes dedicated at the end of the presentation to answer your questions before wrapping up within the 1 hour mark. So thank you so much once again for joining us. I hope that you find this session engaging and fruitful, and I hope that you, have something that you can take away from this that you can actually go and implement in your organizations. Okay, so the agenda for today's session, we're going to start off by looking at some key concerns for IT security teams in this day and age during the pandemic. We'll talk about what are advanced persistent threats or APTs, and really look at this new approach, which is extremely important in SIEM solutions, called threat hunting. Some of you may be, of course, familiar with this term, but we'll really go deep into looking at what is this threat hunting, and then tie it to the 5 cases that we want to talk about, including VPN monitoring, cloud security auditing, and then tracking critical changes made in IT, threat intelligence, and UEBA. Right? Some of them are, of course, some of the more traditional use cases, and some have become especially important and have been highlighted during this pandemic, during the changing IT landscape. So like I said, I have my colleague Shenaz, who's on the chat. So you can ask your questions throughout the session, and we'll try to answer them then and there, either on the chat, and at the end, if you have a lot of questions, and I hope we do, I can do a live Q&A at the end of the presentation. I'd also like to let you know that we will be sending you the recording of this session. We will be sending this to you in about a week's time. And you will, of course, at the end of the presentation, have the opportunity to take a discussion offline. So I'll point you to some resources and email IDs and contacts that you can get in touch with if you want to get more details about Manage Engine solutions. Okay, so let's get started. And this talk is going to be mostly around technologies and mostly around certain trends and observations in the industry. So I want to start off by talking about a few causes for concern, for security administrators. Because of the pandemic in the last few months, the IT landscape might have changed forever. And the problem is not that the change happened, but that the change happened without, a full-fledged plan and change management and, risk assessment and all of that. Because this was probably the trend. A lot of experts say that, this whole work from home or, remote work and large scale cloud adoption was anyway going to be the future. But what was maybe to have happened in the next 10 years ended up happening in just a few weeks, pretty much overnight, when this remote work got implemented earlier this year. And all of a sudden, organizations started rapidly deploying various cloud applications and cloud infrastructure to do their day-to-day business and technology functions. And this led to a lot of security loopholes because a lot of the migration or transition was not really planned. It was not something that happened as a big long-term project. And along with that, we've seen a lot of new attacks, of course, but what is worrying is that we are seeing this trend of targeted attacks, wherein the attacker is not just thinking about launching an attack on the internet and then hoping that maybe a naive organization falls victim to the attack, but rather they are specifically identifying an organization that they'd like to breach. They're doing their research and preparation. They are identifying, things like specific employees that they can target and specific entry points into the organization. They're thinking about what are the security controls you have, and they're carrying out sophisticated attacks that we call advanced persistent threats. And I'll just get to this in a few seconds. And this has made it, it's like a double whammy where you have, these vulnerabilities and loopholes that have been created because of this transition. And now you have more advanced attacks, which has really made it a huge challenge for security teams. And that's why we've been reading about so many high profile cyber attacks all through the year. And I think these are some of the two of the most important reasons why that has happened. So one of the concerns for security teams is that they simply don't have the same level of visibility into security events and threats in the network, especially when organizations are working remotely. Employees might be checking in from their homes, from coffee shops. It's just a much more different sort of control that a security team has over their own employees. Maybe you're doing some good things in your organization in terms of the access controls and identity and access management, but it's still, the system is far from perfect. I've not really, I can't say, that there are too many organizations that were able to do this perfectly, unless they were always in the past, doing remote work. So maybe this wasn't anything new. But this is a big issue, visibility into what are your end users really doing from home. And this is strongly linked with the rising number of insider threats that we've been seeing. And this is again a trend that has been happening over the last couple of years. It's not a 2020 thing per se, but we're seeing now that, insiders are people who really know how your organization works. They know what security solutions you have, what are the security policies and controls, and they are in the best position sometimes to carry out these advanced persistent threats. Right? So when I was talking to you about how in APTs you have a lot of research and preparation about the organization, who better to do that than an insider who's already in your organization? And this is a big cause for concern. Now that the insiders are also working from home, it's much more tricky to track these any sort of espionage in the organization. And finally, we see a lot of data privacy regulations and breach reporting mandates that have been proliferating across the globe. So we've seen, of course, the GDPR was a big one. The GDPR was, the sort of the gold standard in the sense that that was the first one that came out in 2018. But we've seen so many other countries. I know today a lot of you are joining in from Europe, the US, Canada, and in the US, last year they announced the CCPA in California. You have similar regulations in Canada. European countries, of course, those of you joining in from Europe only know too well about the GDPR. And these regulations are making organizations more accountable for sensitive data, and they are mandating disclosures of data breaches. So they're essentially saying, if you have, a disclosure, if you have an exposure of sensitive data in your organization, that you need to now report that incident to the auditors, to the authorities, and that is a crucial aspect of these regulations. So these are some things, that I'm sure some of you might have already been thinking about these things as part of your IT organization. These are some, that sometimes there are no perfect solutions, if I'll be very honest with you, on what can be done. There's no single quick fix, but I do strongly believe that a SIEM solution has become more important than ever before in terms of helping you address these wide range of concerns. So let's look at specifically a little bit into advanced persistent threats. And this is an extremely important topic for anyone who is in cybersecurity, because this is really, in a sense, the future or the cutting edge or the latest cyber attacks that keep organizations and security administrators up at night. Because APTs, like we alluded to in the previous slide, are very difficult to track. So in APTs, an attacker can gain access to a network and remain undetected for a long period of time. It could be days, weeks, or even months. And these attacks are targeted attacks most of the time, because when it's a targeted attack and the attacker really understands what's the security policy of the organization, they're better posed to carry out an attack and go undetected, right? So for example, it could be as simple as, if I know your account policy and I was trying to do some kind of password attack, I may now be a little careful to make sure I don't trigger the account lockout policy, right? So attackers do this and they identify all of the controls and the weaknesses and loopholes that are in the network. Oftentimes the insider is in a very good position to do this. Or even if it's not an insider threat, what ends up happening is the external malicious actor uses social engineering techniques to sort of bait a naive employee in order to gain access to their user accounts or systems. So the attacker might know which are the accounts in the organization they want to go after. Those may be privileged accounts that have access to the critical resources that they want. And they may try, specific techniques and social engineering techniques to gain access to these accounts. And once you gain access, it's whether it's an insider or an outsider who has gained control of a system, it can become very difficult to identify this, especially when they use sophisticated techniques to avoid detection. They slowly try to gain privileges and laterally move across the network, ultimately steal sensitive data. And all this can happen over days, weeks, and months. So it's not something that rings the alarm bells where you immediately realize that something is going on. And it becomes really difficult for security teams to track. So the solution to handling these advanced attacks is what we call threat hunting. Okay, so this is a relatively new term. I mean, not so new that, surely some of you would have come across this term already, but it's something that is really got the attention of a lot of security teams who understand that attacks these days are bypassing your security controls. So gone are the days where you could just sit back, in your security operations center and wait for your detection tools to flag, some possible ongoing attack. Gone are those days, but now you have to be more proactive and constantly search your network for these advanced persistent threats. So you're essentially working with the assumption that an attacker has already breached your network, that an attacker has already gained access into your network. And you need to now assume that there is already an attacker hidden in the network that you are now trying to uncover. And you can do this by running queries and rules using something like a SIEM solution to watch out for what we call indicators of compromise and other kinds of unusual behaviors in the network. So essentially what you're trying to do is search for evidence that in fact there is an attack in the network, right? And of course, if you don't find evidence, then you can at least breathe easy at that point in time that your network is safe and sound. But rather than waiting for the attack to happen and alarm bells to go off, because oftentimes alarm bells don't go off in these advanced persistent threats, instead what you're going to do is you are going to use your SIEM to run specific kinds of queries and monitor specific kinds of activities and keep checking periodically if some potential attack is underway in the network. And if so, you can immediately hunt that threat down and investigate and mitigate the incident. So that is really the approach that we're looking at going forward. This is how we want to take things forward with SIEM. And with that said, let's get to the 5 cases quickly that we want to talk about. And you can link this to the ideas of SIEM and threat hunting. So the first topic that I want to talk about is monitoring VPN activities. So your VPN obviously has become more important than ever before, and VPN adoption has really been on the rise in the last in the last few months because of the pandemic. And in fact, I'd like to quickly ask you on the chat, how many of you would say that in your organization VPN adoption has risen dramatically in the last few months? Let me see if I can get a few yeses or no's from the audience on the chat. How many of you have actually seen a surge in VPN adoption in your organization in the last few months? And most of you would usually end up saying that, yeah, this is what's happening in the organization. I see a few of you have raised your hand. So yeah, I mean, and a lot of you have also are telling us on the chat that it's a considerable amount and it's a definite yes. So thank you, Blake and Eric, for engaging with us. So, I mean, I think most of us agree today that the VPN has become the way by which, employees can take access into the corporate network. And, while it's very functional and everything, don't get me wrong, what has happened is that it's given attackers a new point of entry into your organization, right? So that's something that doesn't get thought about as much as it should. In fact, we've seen a lot of VPN-based attacks, right? If you just quickly search on Google, you'll see that there have been a lot of VPN-based ransomware attacks, VPN-based denial of service attacks that try to, take down your network and affect employee productivity. And these have been using various kinds of vulnerabilities in the VPN applications. Because most of the time, this just goes back to how the transition happened without much planning. Back in the day, I think most of us would agree that we neglect updating things like VPNs, right? It usually does not get priority compared to, say, deploying critical patches on a server or something like that. Oftentimes, the VPN updates tend to be ignored, and a lot of VPN vulnerabilities have been around that get exploited by attackers. And as a result, we've seen a lot of VPN-based ransomware attacks and denial of service attacks. So this has become really a point of entry, because how attackers see it is that if they can gain access to, some into your network via the because normally maybe you don't have certain resources open to the internet, and if maybe it's some critical sensitive information, you have it in a demilitarized zone, and you actually might have physical barriers and access controls to allow only the authorized personnel inside. But today you might have opened some of these things in your organization via VPN, and that can become a cause for concern because an attacker can gain access. And as we saw with advanced persistent threats, they can use various kinds of techniques to, laterally move across the network, gain privileges, and access the data that you're trying to protect. So my question to you is, are you tracking VPN logons and critical usage in your enterprise? Because this ends up being, an extremely crucial aspect of SIEM solutions in this day and age. So much so that we see a lot of our own customers coming to us, with questions on how they can use our tools to monitor their VPNs. We've in fact also enhanced the monitoring capabilities of our tools to give dedicated focus on the VPNs, right? So you're talking about having dedicated dashboards and reports to monitor VPN logs, and then being able to, of course, correlate VPN activities with those occurring on servers and applications in order to unearth a potential attack, an ongoing attack in the organization. So let me quickly show you how this would look like. I don't want to go too deep into, into our solution, but this is Event Log Analyzer, one of the components of our SIEM solution called Log360. And I just want to quickly show you that, when I talk about how when we say VPN monitoring, it's not something that is meant to be done in silos, but it's really part of your overall monitoring plan of your network. So along with looking at things like what are the events happening on the network, the allowed and denied connections, the trends in traffic, the website's access, you also want to keep tabs on these VPN logons and have these dashboards available in your security team. And like I said, this is not something to be done in silos, but along with this, you want to look at, your security overview. You want to look at things like how many vulnerabilities are there? Are there any correlated incidents? What are the events flagged on the IDS, IPS, the threat intelligence, and so on? And over and above these, dashboards, you also want to have the correlation functionality to get alerts for suspicious VPN activities in the network. And I have some simulated data that I'd like to show you for an alert that has been triggered by our product for the installation of a suspicious software. So you can see here that there is an alert. It says suspicious software installation. And if I click on the event timeline, I can essentially see a chain of events that happened in this specific security incident starting on the VPN, right? So it starts on the VPN. I see some VPN access activities, a user trying to log on to the VPN, and there are multiple failed logons, followed by a successful logon. And then on the Windows server, I see that there is a remote logon followed by the installation of a software on the server. So essentially a lot of different things have happened, right? You have a lot of events that have been triggered, some on the VPN and then on the Windows server. And the correlation engine is essentially able to map this entire chain of events into a single attack kill chain and raise an alert, right? So you can see how the VPN monitoring ties into your broader picture of the SIEM. Because if you were just looking at your VPN logs, your story would end right here. You would just get to see that there was a sort of brute force logon pattern where you had multiple failed logons followed by a successful one. And then you have some activities on the Windows server. You have a remote logon and an installation of a software. But by combining these two capabilities, you will be able to, uncover a potential security incident. And a tool like ours can raise an alert and present to you this entire chain of events as a single incident, right? So you can see how the VPN activities really ties into, these into the broader concept of SIEM solutions, bringing in that correlation. And in this way, you can really detect a wide range of attacks that you may have missed otherwise. And that brings me to the second case, which is auditing cloud platforms. So again, just like you had a VPN, usage boom, you also have a lot more organizations rapidly accelerating their cloud strategy. A lot of you might be hosting increasingly things on Azure, AWS, or Google Cloud, whichever, or a multi-cloud setup where you have all or more than one of these platforms. And you may be using SaaS applications like Salesforce and Microsoft 365 for day-to-day business productivity. And both your business and technology functions are being done from the cloud. So the problem is not really with the fact that I'm not going to get into a debate about is the cloud more or less secure. It's really not about that, but rather that a lot of the security controls that are available on premise do not seamlessly translate to the cloud, right? So if you have a lot of, you have specific kinds of controls on your on-premise file server or your database or your Active Directory domain controllers, a lot of the times organizations don't have that same level of security controls on the cloud. So if you have, for example, if you just take, maybe you have a critical server on premise and you have perfect access controls enabled and privileged user monitoring, and you have all the mechanisms. But think about, you take maybe one of your SaaS applications, maybe like a Salesforce, and on that platform, you might have things like customer data or employee data. And then if somebody copies that data from the cloud platform, you may not be logging that event and actually knowing that someone has maybe exported data from the cloud application, right? So that's something. I'm not saying that everyone doesn't do it, but I'm saying a lot of organizations don't replicate the same security controls that they have on premise over to the cloud, and that can really create issues. And I've given a few examples, right? In addition to a user, maybe copying data from a SaaS application, maybe it could be something like an S3 bucket that is being deleted on your AWS. Maybe someone changes a database server configuration on Azure. Maybe you might be using maybe Office 365 or Exchange Online for email, and an employee might receive an email with a suspicious message header, right? The content of the email may be suspicious, and you may want to be able to track that. And I'm not talking about the case where it goes into the spam, because that anyway gets flagged. But I'm talking about maybe a case of a social engineering attack where maybe a business partner or a client who may be seen as a trusted source is communicating with an employee and is trying to trick the employee into maybe clicking on a phishing link or downloading some malware which has been attached as a file. And because it's a trusted sender who normally communicates with that employee, it's not something that gets flagged as a spam. So these are things that, advanced persistent threats, these attackers identify ways by which they can actually get into the network. And on the cloud, you may not really know that if a specific employee received an email with a suspicious content or attachment. And at the same time, I also have a simple example from an identity and access management point of view. What if somebody goes and modifies users and groups on maybe Azure Active Directory or AWS? Such events can create a loophole that must be checked. So what I'm really saying is not give any extra priority to the cloud, or the cloud is more secure or less secure or requires more measures. But all I'm saying is add it to your security monitoring stack, so to speak. Because traditionally, if you were looking at monitoring your organization, you essentially had four main layers. You had the network layer, the host layer, the application layer, and the data, which may be there in your files and folders. And you were traditionally looking at, okay, what can I monitor at the network perimeter? You look at your firewalls and routers and switches. At the hosts, you're looking for specific suspicious activities like installations of services or other kinds of activities on the host. You may be looking at specific things on applications as well. You may be looking at what's going on your database or web apps, and you may be looking at data accesses and modifications. But over and above that, especially today, it's become really important to add one more layer to your monitoring stack, and that would be your cloud platforms. So look at the same kind of security events that are happening on cloud platforms, on your SaaS applications, on the mailboxes, what are the attachments, and make sure that you have these five, you're staying on top of these five layers, because in this day and age, this has become so crucial that you are actually able to have this holistic view of what's going on in the network. One of the first points that I brought up was that organizations don't have the visibility into what is going on in the network, that they do not have the visibility into any security event that is happening in the network. And one of the main reasons for that is they end up missing the cloud layer. So a lot of users engage and interact with data and resources on the cloud, and there is no visibility into that. So make sure that you are, tracking these things, and that you are, and that you're staying on top of really all these five layers. And that brings me to the third case, which is tracking changes made to configurations in IT. Right. So, of course, this is something that has been an age-old best practice to really keep tracking and validating all the different changes made across your IT infrastructure. These could be to various permissions or privileges, to your firewall policies, to your application whitelists, Active Directory objects, and so on. And we've always said, review and validate these changes that are happening in your IT, because these kinds of changes, some like the ones that I haven't read, what if the membership of a top level group in Active Directory is changed? What if a critical GPO is modified? A user may be given access to read or write a sensitive file. Maybe a firewall rule is deleted. These kinds of events could, end up jeopardizing the security policies in your organization. It might result in a loophole that can now be exploited by an attacker. And attackers often try to carry out some kind of change in the IT, in terms of your configurations before carrying out an attack. So it could be even that they've colluded with an insider and they're able to somehow get themselves added to one of the top security groups. And once someone is in that group, they might have authorized access to specific resources. So it becomes very hard to really know that, that something is, something is amiss or something unusual is happening. So it's better to track and validate changes then and there, and to have reports generated that tell you what are the latest changes that have happened in your Active Directory or your firewall. And you can immediately validate those changes and ensure that these changes were in fact legitimate, that these changes were in fact authorized by the IT manager, and it was not a case of an unchecked change, or worse, maybe a malicious administrator who has made a critical change to one of your IT configurations. So I just want to touch upon this by showing you our AD Audit Plus component of Log360, which is a real-time Active Directory auditing tool that watches out for various changes happening in your Active Directory in real time and generates reports that allow you to track and validate these changes. Right. So I don't want to go too deep into this. Just bear with me a couple of seconds as this loads. I just want to show you, what kind of reporting can you get, what kind of details can you see, and how you can actually schedule these reports to ensure that these are maybe sent to you every day or every week, and you are actually able to ensure that the changes that were made were in fact legitimate. Let me just try reloading that. Okay, sorry about that. So just taking a little more time than I expected. I just want to show you on the reporting section. So maybe if I can quickly jump into that tab itself rather than waiting for all of the data on the dashboard to load. I just want to show you that we have a bunch of different change auditing reports. So you can see them while it loads. You can just see the menu to see that we're talking about specific kinds of events that are happening in Active Directory, changes made to the users, changes made to the groups, changes made to computers, OUs, and you want to sometimes check, what were the recently modified OUs or groups, and you can pull out that information. Right, so I think the setup has loaded. So I just want to give you an example. Take something like your group management, right? You have people making changes to your Active Directory groups, and you might want to see what were the recently modified groups in your Active Directory, right? So I'm just looking at a period of last 30 days for this one, and I can see what were the different groups that were modified. So I mean, I can essentially read these events and go, oh, why was that enterprise admins modified? Why was administrators modified? Schema admins, domain admins, forget some of maybe the smaller groups, but the top level groups like domain admins and schema admins have been modified. And these events, these should not happen under normal circumstances. So that there had better be a good reason why this happened. And you might want to investigate why this event happened, right? So you can actually schedule these reports. What we recommend doing is schedule them on a daily basis so that you can every day come in and look at what are the changes happening in Active Directory. You can immediately flag if you see, oh, why was domain admins modified and who did it? When was it done? And you can check if that was in fact a legitimate change. And that's not all. You can also go, in addition to scheduling these reports, you can also set up alerts. You can actually go ahead and set up alerts so that you get notified in real time for specific events of interest, such as when a critical GPO or one of the top level groups like domain admins is modified. Right, so I'm not going to go too deep into this. I think my setup is also going a little slow, but I just wanted to reiterate that, the various changes that are happening in Active Directory, could be both on-premise or Azure AD. You want to really have these reporting functionalities to track what's going on in your Active Directory, what are the changes that are being made, and these changes, if unchecked, can jeopardize the security policy of your organization. So very simple reports, all it shows is, recently modified groups, but you can see it's very powerful in giving you information to help you identify a potential unchecked change that could jeopardize your security. So that is the third point. And like I said, this is an age-old, best practice. We've always been talking about change auditing and watching out for these kinds of changes. But I think during the pandemic and with more work from home and with attackers often trying to access your identity and access management controls in order to, gain privileges, you really want to make sure that anyone who's changing things in your, be it Active Directory or your firewall or your database or your application whitelist, that you are actually making sure that those changes were approved and authorized. Okay, so that brings me to the fourth case, which is on using threat intelligence. Right, so a lot of you might have heard of threat intelligence or maybe even using it already in your organization. Threat intelligence has become a really crucial technology to have as part of your monitoring solution in order to identify known malicious domains that may be communicating with the network. Right, so a lot of the times the problem gets a lot more simpler if you know who is the adversary or who is the attacker that you're dealing with. And threat intelligence is a great way of exposing this, potential untrusted sources that are interacting with your network. So these are essentially done as a lot of security researchers work on this all day, every day, and they keep identifying the latest emerging threats in the World Wide Web, and they maintain this data and make it available for security professionals to make use of to safeguard their network against these threats that have been discovered. So of course, it's not that threat intelligence protects you against literally every threat out there, but it can go a long way in providing protection against, some of the known threats, and that by itself can really, give you a lot of cover. And I think it's so important in this day and age because a lot of new threats keep getting discovered every day. New phishing sites, new malicious domains that act as, command and control or callback servers. A lot of these are, on the World Wide Web and are getting flagged by security researchers every day. So why not just make use of that information in your, monitoring solution, so that you can start checking your logs for known malicious IPs, domains, and URLs. So we're talking about, your monitoring solution is looking at the network perimeter. It's looking at what's going on the firewalls and routers. And it's looking at, the allowed and denied connections. And if you see that one of those sources matches with a threat intelligence feed, that could, be a cause for concern that you might now want to come in and investigate. And you might want to see, why is this domain that is appearing on a threat list actually communicating with your network? And at that point, you might want more actionable intelligence into the threat that has been flagged, such as the classification of the IP or URL, the geoinformation, the category of the threat, and the reputation score, right? And this is particularly useful in a case where, one of the use cases for advanced persistent threats is on what we call communications with a callback server, right? So you might have a command and control server that is, controlling some systems in the network. And if there is this malicious communication that is detected with a known domain that is, or callback server that is known to be malicious, the threat intelligence can immediately flag that communication and notify that to you. And in our solution, because we have, a very strong threat intelligence platform, we give you deeper insights into the threats that have been flagged. So what you see here is a domain that has been flagged as malicious, that is communicating with the network. We have a reputation score, which is essentially, a number which tells you how trusted that domain is. And this is courtesy of our partnership with Webroot, the threat intelligence company. And we, because of those details, bringing those details into our SIEM platform, we can now give you details about the communication. So we can give you the geo information, the category of the threat, and best of all, we can give you a recommendation so that all this information is now actionable and you can take appropriate, response action in mitigating this threat. So we're essentially doing two things here. On one hand, we are monitoring the firewall logs and we're looking at, what are the communications happening in the network. And on the other hand, we are using the threat intelligence platform to match the logs with the threat feeds and check to see if any domain or URL that is appearing on the threat feed is, appearing in your network logs. And that could immediately notify you that there could be a malicious communication happening in the network. So that brings me to the last topic that I want to discuss, and that is on UEBA or UEBA, which stands for User and Entity Behavior Analytics. This is again an extremely important technology to have in your SIEM solution. It's really a way by which you can augment your SIEM solution, because your traditional SIEM solution may have a lot of rules and alerting rules and correlation rules as part of its detection mechanisms. But what we've learned about advanced persistent threats is that they can bypass these rule-based systems. They, because attackers might know that you have these specific correlation triggers that have been set up across the network. And, they may, for them, it's like, oh, okay, I can just do the attack in a more clever way so that I don't, end up tripping one of your correlation rules. And it becomes, then you end up, the attack might go undetected. So to fill up those gaps where your rules cannot really come in to, detect a potential threat, you want what we call UEBA or UEBA, which uses machine learning based techniques on the log data that has been collected already to form security baselines and subsequently watch out for deviations from these baselines, what we call anomalies. And you can proactively track these anomalies in the network. And this becomes really a very, very crucial tool in your threat hunting portfolio, because when you're hunting for threats, rather than just looking out for known indicators of compromise, you may want to look out for unusual behaviors that could be the telltale signs of an attack. So you might not, you don't want to maybe think about your traditional rules and run a specific rule on your network when you're hunting for threats, but you might instead want to look at behaviors which could be more accurate in uncovering a potential hidden threat in the network. So let me quickly show you how that would look like. And I'm just jumping into Log360 UEBA, which is an add-on of Log360, which works on the data that has been collected by Log360 to track anomalous events in the network. So what you see here is a dynamic dashboard that gives you the risk scores of every user and entity in the network. And these risk scores are computed based on the unusual behaviors that have been detected on these users and systems. So you can see that most of the users in this case have a low risk score in the network, and a few users have a relatively high risk score that gets reflected here on the left pane. So what I can do is, as part of my threat hunting, I might want to go and check anomalies on specific top level accounts like the administrator account. So I can see here that that has a pretty high risk score, and I want to now click on this user. I can now get to see, okay, it could be compromised account, it could be an insider threat, it could be data exfiltration. I get to see what kind of threats this user could pose. I can click on view details and see the anomalies that this user has triggered. So in this case, I can see some unusual logon activities. I can see file deletions. I can see unusual directory creations, directory deletions, file downloads, file uploads, multiple files deleted. All of the details about it are also given. So for example, when it says multiple files deleted, the threshold for the file events for this administrator is 13, but 100 events have been detected, right? This administrator has done 100 events in terms of deleting the files. And so this is an anomaly based on the volume of events, because it clearly exceeds the threshold by a huge factor. And you can now drill down immediately and get into the details of what are these file deletions that were made, right? So it's as simple as that. We just give you this interface. I already see a question, in fact, from Abe, who asks, is UEBA, Log360's UEBA a managed engine product or a partner? No, it's one of our products. So it is just, an add-on to Log360. So if you're already using Log360, you just have to apply this license, and UEBA works on the data that has been collected by Log360 So you can think of Event Log Analyzer and AD Audit Plus, which are the two main components of Log360, as being log collectors. They collect the logs from specific sources like Active Directory and your firewalls and applications. And the UEBA component acts as an add-on. It works on top of the data. It works on top of the data collected by Log360. And that's why we can now give you these risk scores proactively. All you need to do is now identify a user that has a high risk score. You can click on that user. You can then click on the view details to get the list of anomalies, and you can actually drill down. You can see why something is an anomaly, and you can actually drill down to those individual events from the same console. And I have another question from Abe. Abe also wants to know, can you alert admins when the users exceed a threshold risk score? So I'm just paraphrasing the question, but essentially what Abe is asking is, can we alert the administrator when the risk score of a specific user crosses a threshold? So yes, you can absolutely do that. So we have an alerting module right here. So you can actually customize and you can say, you can say, I would like to be alerted for when the user, when the risk score exceeds a specific, threshold. So you can do that. So you can just say, what type of anomaly? Are you looking at overall anomalies, which is the total risk score? And if it exceeds a specific, value that you can specify here, you can actually get notified about that. And you can now view all the alerts right here that have been triggered for violations of the risk score. You can also, in fact, go, while we're at it, I can tell you that you can also go and do some customizations of the risk scoring. You can also go ahead and tweak some of these parameters that go into contributing the risk score. But I don't want to go too deep into that. I just want to touch upon that. We give you these risk scores not just for your users. So what we saw was for the users, but also for your entities, also for your various systems, which could be your workstations and servers, right? So you can do the same risk scoring. You can click on a specific specific system, just as you did for users. You can drill down and view the anomalies on that specific system, because sometimes maybe the system has been compromised and might be triggering anomalies. And you can also do the same kind of reporting, where we give you dedicated anomaly reports, which allow you to, gain intelligence about specific kinds of events, such as logon events or USB activities or file activities, and watch out for anomalies based on the time, volume, and pattern of events, right? So you can actually schedule these reports. So just as we spoke about scheduling reports for tracking certain kinds of changes, you can actually do it granularly for tracking anomalies. These are available not just for your devices, but also for your cloud services, certain applications, and firewall devices. Right? So I don't want to go too deep into all of this. I do see a couple of questions that I'd like to take more on the UEBA. First is from, we have a question from Abe again, who asks, oh, I'm sorry, I think I've already answered that one. So I have a question from Jamie, who asks, the last Gartner Magic Quadrant says Log360 has no UEBA. Well, no, actually, I think it does, Jamie. You could, I can just maybe forward the report to you, because I was, in fact, the person who presented to the Gartner analyst, and we did demonstrate our UEBA. So I think, I'm not sure what was mentioned in the report per se. I might have to revisit that. But the 2020 report will have UEBA. We don't position UEBA in the Magic Quadrant. It would just be positioned as Manage Engine, which essentially has a portfolio of tools that constitute SIEM. right? Because the Magic Quadrant from Gartner is specifically for SIEM, and UEBA is treated as one of the components. But you know, it should be mentioned. You know, I don't want to, you know, let me just read it again, but it should be mentioned because we did in fact demonstrate UEBA for the Gartner Magic Quadrant demo, and we do have the report published on our website. So I could point you to that. You know, on the chat, we can just send across, you know, to Jamie. And also I see a couple of others who have asked for the report. So you know what we can instead do is I'll just get my colleague to send you the Gartner Magic Quadrant report on the chat so that, you know, anyone who's interested can read it. And just one more question from Abe, who asks, what kind of integrations are available with Service Desk Plus and other Zoho products? So yeah, so we do integrate our SIEM solution with Service Desk Plus. I don't think we integrate with Service Desk Plus Cloud at this point, but we do integrate with the on-premise Service Desk Plus for ticket management. I'm not sure if we do integrate with the cloud version, but I can check on that and get back to you. All right, so that brings me to almost the end of, you know, the presentation. I just had one last pointer to share with you before we wrap up for Q&A. And this is on why does an organization ultimately turn to a SIEM tool? You know, so we in fact conducted a survey of over 120 IT security professionals over the past few months. And amongst those using a SIEM, I have this one stat which really sums up, you know, why someone must turn to a SIEM solution. And 33% of the organization said that the main concern for doing so was for, you know, meeting a compliance regulation or recommendation by an auditor. And this goes hand in hand with the fact that we have so many data protection regulations and breach reporting mandates, and a SIEM solution really aligns well with, you know, some of these demands of the compliance regulations. But we see that the overwhelming majority, 2 in 3 organizations, saying that the primary purpose of deploying a SIEM solution is for improving the security posture and tackling advanced cyber attacks. So when we talk about things like advanced persistent threats and threat hunting, our SIEM platform really is the go-to tool for an administrator to go and you know, hunt for these threats in the network using some of the technologies that we discussed, like UEBA, threat intelligence, you know, VPN monitoring, and so on. So it's really, you know, a SIEM solution has become more important than ever before. It has become something that has really, because of all the changes that we're seeing in the IT landscape, having a proper monitoring program in your organization is extremely important to stay on top of the latest threats. So with that said, I'm just launching a quick poll on the screen that you can all view right now. This is just to check if any of you want assistance with a demo of Log360. I know we had a lot of questions coming in. I'll just maybe answer one or two more. In fact, we've also, my colleague Shanaz has posted on the chat the Gartner Magic Quadrant report for 2020. So, you know, a couple of you were asking for that. So you can just, you know, access this from the chat. And those of you who would like to have a more detailed discussion offline with the product specialist such as myself, you know, we do a lot of these personalized demos for organizations where we can actually come in, answer your questions, you know, deploy the tool so that you can evaluate the tool at your convenience. So a quick call from our end before you do that might just help you, you know, identify what are some of the things you want to consider, and you can get a free license for 30 days that will help you evaluate all of the functionalities before deciding if if our tool is a good fit for you. So yeah, let me just quickly look at the questions. I think I answered those questions from Abe. Yeah, Jamie, who asked about, Jamie, who asked about um, the magic quadrant. Yeah, maybe you can just read that one again. I don't want to, give any misleading information. But as far as, I can tell we did demo UEBA, and it is something that is recognized as part of the Gartner Magic Quadrant. Okay, and let's see. Yeah, I think we've answered most of the questions on the chat. So if you do have more questions, you can keep them coming either on the Q&A or on the chat option, and we'll be here for a few more minutes to answer that. But apart from that, thank you so much for joining us. We will try to, speak with our team about checking on the, checking on the some of the feature requests that we received, like integrating with Service Desk plus Cloud. I'm not sure. I don't think we do that, which is why I didn't want to commit that. At the same time, a lot of you wanted things like comparison documents with other vendors. You can just reach out to us on the email ID that you see for any resource. So log360-support@manageengine.com. If you drop an email requesting for a specific comparison document with a vendor, our support team will answer that, reply to you within 12 to 24 hours. So anything that you need, of course, today you asked for the Gartner, reprint of the Magic Quadrant report, and we've sent that to you. But, any other resources that you may want, some of you might want specific documentations about, specific compliance regulations. And we have a ton of resources, comparison documents that we can send you. So just drop in an email. Have another question from Vasilis, who asks, can event log analyzer correlate with Cisco firewalls and routers? Oh yes, absolutely, we can do that. So we support Cisco firewalls and routers out of the box. So if you actually look at our correlation engine, oops, I think I might have just lost my connection. So let me just quickly log in again. Just quickly going to answer this one final question before wrapping up. So we do track, Cisco firewalls, and we do bring in those events into our correlation engine. So Vasilis, you can see on the left pane, we have these Cisco router and firewall events that we can actually do in terms of writing our own custom correlation rules by bringing in these events, as well as we do have some pre-built correlation rules that are available that you can see on the left pane right here, which will bring in some of the events from your, firewalls, routers. So you have these potential network threats. And we do have a few pre-built rules as well as part of the correlation, but we allow you to bring in the data from your Cisco firewalls and routers to write your own rules also, if you will. We also give out-of-the-box reports. We also give out-of-the-box reports with, for Cisco firewalls and routers. So you can actually see, I think we have over 100 reports for the Cisco infrastructure, and Abe asks if it includes Cisco Meraki. And yes, we do support the Meraki device as well. You can see that right here. My cursor is pointing to that. So we give you a wide range of, reports on the firewall traffic, the VPN logons, the IDS, IPS activities, a whole bunch of reports that are available out of the box. And you can actually bring these events into the correlation and alerting module for more in-depth analysis. Yes, it's very much possible. And if you want, specific documents for comparing our solution with other vendors, if you just drop in an email to this ID with, exactly which vendor or which resource you're looking for, our support team will be more than happy to give those details to you, within 12 to 24 hours. So do reach out to us. I do hope to receive emails from you. And finally, before I wrap up, you can also see a feedback poll that has been launched on the screen. I really appreciate you taking time off your busy schedules and, engaging with us on the live chat. We did shoot our presentation deadline by a few minutes, but I'm really happy for doing that because, of the number of questions and engagement that we got on the chat. And I hope this was a fruitful experience for all of you in attending this webinar. And I hope you, got a few pointers, learned one or two new things that you can now take back and implement in your organization. And like I said, if you are interested in evaluating managed engine solutions in the space and you want to know more about what we do, you can just email us on the ID that you see. I'm also, just displaying my email ID on the screen in case you want to reach out to me directly. You can just write to siddharth@manageengine.com with any questions or, any resources or documents that might help you with the evaluation. And I promise you, we all reply to your emails within 12 to 24 hours, even if you're not a customer, right? Even if you're just looking for a document or something, we send that to you immediately. So I can guarantee that. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us. Once again, we really appreciate you participating on the polls and on the chat. And I hope to see you in the next couple of weeks. We have few more events and virtual events from Manage Engine. So I hope to see you there. So thank you so much for joining us, and bye for now.